In 1891 Montana, desperate women were sold like cattle to pay debts they never owed. Eleanor Vale stood on that auction block, seconds from becoming property of the most dangerous man in Cedar Falls. Then a mountain outlaw burst through those church doors, kissed her in front of everyone, and threw gold at the altar like a challenge to hell itself. What happened next tore apart an entire town. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Eleanor Vale's freedom died, the sky over Cedar Falls burned orange like infected flesh. She stood in the cramped back room of St. Catherine's Church, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror somebody had propped against the wall. The dress they'd given her was cream-colored cotton, simple and cheap, the kind you buried people in when their families couldn't afford better. It hung loose around her shoulders. She'd lost weight these past 3 weeks. Hadn't been able to keep food down since the banker's men came to her door with papers declaring her father's debts now belonged to her. 23 years old, never been kissed, about to be sold. The other women in the room didn't speak. There were 4 of them total, pressed together in a space meant for storing hymnals and sacramental wine. Mary Hutchins sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly. She was 16. Her father had gambled away their farm in a poker game Whitmore's men had probably rigged. Catherine Chen stood near the window, perfectly still, staring out at the mountains like she was memorizing them. She'd come west with her husband to open a laundry. He'd died in a mining accident that witnesses swore wasn't an accident at all. And then there was Rose Sullivan, 40 if she was a day, face hard as the frontier had made it, chain-smoking hand-rolled cigarettes she'd bummed off the church custodian. "They're filling up out there," Rose said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "Looks like half the territory showed up." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her stomach, trying to will them steady. "How many men?" "Dozen, maybe. Hard to tell. Most of them look like they crawled out from under rocks." Rose took another drag. "Whitmore's sitting front row, naturally, dressed like he's attending an opera instead of a slave market." "Don't call it that," Mary whispered. Rose looked at her. "What else would you call it, honey?" Mary didn't answer. Her eyes were wet. Catherine finally turned from the window. "Does it matter what we call it? We're here. They're out there. In 30 minutes, we'll belong to whoever pays our price." Her voice was flat, emptied of everything except fact. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. 3 weeks ago, she'd been planning her father's funeral. Daniel Vale, town librarian, gentle man who'd taught her to read Latin and love poetry and believed the world had more good in it than bad. They'd found him at the bottom of the stairs in their home, neck broken, bottle of whiskey shattered beside him. The sheriff ruled it accidental death. Drunk old man took a tumble. Except her father hadn't touched liquor in 15 years. And the very next morning, Harold Whitmore appeared at her door with documents showing debts she'd never heard of. Loans her father supposedly took. Gambling markers. Business investments gone wrong. All of it adding up to more money than Eleanor could earn in 3 lifetimes. "Sign over the house," Whitmore had said, standing in her doorway like he already owned it, or settle the debt another way. She'd understood what another way meant when the notice came about the bride auction. Voices rose in the chapel beyond the door. Men's voices, rough and impatient. Someone laughed, cruel sound, sharp as broken glass. Rose stubbed out her cigarette on the windowsill. "My husband died owing Whitmore for medical bills. Doctor was drunk when he tried to remove the bullet, and my Tom bled out on our kitchen table. But somehow I'm the one paying for it." She looked at Eleanor. "What did your father do? Really?" "Nothing," Eleanor said. "He didn't do anything." "Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. Because the truth was bigger than this room, bigger than this auction, and saying it out loud wouldn't change what was about to happen. The door opened. Reverend Thomas stood there, gray-haired and bent-backed, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past month. He wouldn't meet their eyes. "It's time, ladies." Nobody moved. "Please," he said quietly, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rose stood first, brushing ash off her dress. "Come on, girls. Let's get purchased." They filed out into the narrow hallway. Eleanor's legs felt disconnected from her body, like she was watching herself move from somewhere far away. She could hear the crowd now, men talking, boots scuffing against floorboards, someone coughing wet and phlegmy. The Reverend stopped them just before the chapel entrance. When your name is called, you'll walk to the front and stand beside me. Bidding will proceed in an orderly fashion. Once a price is agreed upon, the marriage will be performed immediately. Do you understand? Mary started crying, small, choked sounds she tried to muffle with her hand. I said, do you understand? Yes, Catherine said. Yes, Rose echoed. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. The Reverend pushed open the door, and sound crashed over them. The chapel was packed, men shoulder to shoulder in the pews, more standing along the walls, some perched in the window frames. The air stank of sweat and tobacco and something else, something hungry and wrong. Harold Whitmore sat in the front row, exactly where Rose said he'd be. He wore a charcoal suit with a burgundy vest, gold watch chain glinting across his considerable stomach. 55 years old, hair going silver at the temples, face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty that lived behind his eyes. He owned the bank. He owned the hotel. He owned half the businesses in town and most of the land surrounding it. People said he'd come west after the war with nothing but a carpet bag and a talent for finding other people's weaknesses. When Eleanor walked past him, he smiled. She looked away, focusing on the altar ahead. Reverend Thomas climbed the steps and turned to face the crowd. His hands trembled as he opened his Bible. Gentlemen, he began, voice barely carrying over the murmur of conversation, we are gathered here today to— Skip the sermon, Reverend, someone shouted from the back. Let's see the merchandise. Laughter rippled through the chapel. The Reverend's face reddened, but he nodded and closed his Bible. Very well. First is Miss Mary Hutchins, 16 years of age. Her father's outstanding debt is $400. Bidding will start at $500, a man called out. He was sitting 3 rows back, buckskin jacket and beard down to his chest. I'll take her for $500. Mary went white. $550, another voice. This one from a rancher Eleanor recognized, old enough to be Mary's grandfather, reputation for going through wives like firewood. $600. $7. Mary was shaking so hard Eleanor could see it from where she stood. The bidding climbed higher. $900, $1,000, $1,200. The buckskin man won. Mary stumbled forward like she'd been pushed, and the Reverend performed a ceremony so quick and hollow it barely qualified as language. 30 seconds, and Mary Hutchins became Mary whoever he was, property of a stranger who'd paid $1,200 for the privilege. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. She looked back once, eyes finding Eleanor's, and the expression there would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. Then they were gone. Catherine went next. Her debt was $600, laundry equipment and medical bills from her husband's death. A mine foreman bought her for $850. She walked to him with her head high, face blank as paper. Didn't flinch when he took her hand. Rose Sullivan fought. When the bidding reached $1,000 and the winner stood up, gap-toothed man who ran the slaughterhouse, Rose looked straight at Reverend Thomas and said, I won't do it. The chapel went quiet. Miss Sullivan, the Reverend said, you signed the contract. The debt must be— I don't care what I signed. I won't marry that man. The slaughterhouse owner laughed. Don't matter if you will or won't, sweetheart. I paid for you. Rose spat at his feet. What happened next happened fast. 2 of Whitmore's men moved from the walls, grabbed Rose by her arms, and dragged her toward the slaughterhouse owner. She screamed, kicked, connected her boot with one man's knee hard enough to make him curse. But there were too many of them, and Rose was alone. And within seconds she was standing beside her new husband, whether she wanted to be or not. The Reverend rushed through the vows. Rose's husband kissed her hard enough to bruise, and when she tried to pull away, he held the back of her head and kept kissing her until the men in the crowd started hooting. Eleanor tasted bile. Then it was her turn. Miss Eleanor Vale, the Reverend announced, and his voice broke on her name. He'd known her father. They'd played chess together every Thursday evening for years. Outstanding debt of $3,000. The crowd noise changed, became sharper, more focused. 3,000 was more than most of these men would see in 5 years. Bidding starts at 5,000, Whitmore said. He didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, just said it calm and clear, like he was ordering breakfast. Silence crashed through the chapel. Eleanor's vision tunneled. She stared at Whitmore, and he stared back.
that same slight smile on his face. This was what he'd wanted all along. This whole sick theater had been arranged just so he could sit there and buy her in front of everyone. $5,000, the Reverend repeated weakly. Do I hear? That's not a bid, someone said. That's a claim. Whitmore inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth of it.
Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. She wouldn't cry. Wouldn't give him that. But her father's voice echoed in her head. Be brave, Ellie girl. When the world gets dark, be braver than the dark. And she wanted to scream that she didn't know how, didn't know what brave looked like when you were standing in a church being sold to the man who'd probably murdered your father. Going once, the Reverend said. Whitmore stood up, smoothing his vest. Going twice? The church doors exploded open. The sound was like cannon fire, wood slamming against stone so hard the building shook. Every head turned. Eleanor's heart stopped. A man filled the doorway. Not walked through it, filled it. He was massive, built like something you'd need an axe to bring down. 6'4" at least, shoulders broad enough to block the sun. He wore canvas pants and a battered leather coat that looked older than most of the men in the room, dark hair that needed cutting, and several days' worth of beard covering a face that might have been handsome except for the scar running from his left temple to his jaw. But it was his eyes that made Eleanor's breath catch. Dark eyes, furious eyes, eyes that swept across the chapel like he was counting targets. The hell is this? Someone muttered. The man walked forward, slow, deliberate, boots loud against the floorboards. The crowd parted without being asked, men pressing back against the pews to let him pass. Harold Whitmore's smile disappeared. Colt Mercer. The name hit the room like a thrown stone. Eleanor had heard it before. Everyone in the territory had. The Mountain Devil, the land war killer, the outcast who'd murdered his neighbors over a water dispute and fled into the wilderness 7 years ago. People said he lived like an animal up there, hunting and trapping, coming down only when he needed supplies. People said he'd gone half mad from isolation. People said a lot of things, most of them whispered. Mercer didn't stop walking until he was standing directly in front of Eleanor. Up close, he was even bigger. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close, she could see the scar wasn't the only mark on him. There was another along his jaw, a third disappearing into his hairline. This was a man who'd survived things that should have killed him. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked, like he was trying to read something in her face. Then he kissed her. Just leaned down and kissed her, right there in front of everyone. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, gentle but certain, and his mouth was warm against hers and tasted like coffee and wood smoke and something wild she had no name for. Eleanor's mind went blank. This wasn't happening, couldn't be happening. But his lips were real, his hand was real, and when he pulled back half a second later, the heat in her face was definitely real. The chapel had gone absolutely silent. Mercer turned to face Whitmore, reached into his coat and pulled out a leather sack, heavy enough that it made a solid thunk when he tossed it onto the altar. Coins spilled out, gold eagles, $20 pieces, enough to make the Reverend take a step back. 6,000, Mercer said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Cash! Whitmore's face had gone red. This auction is a legal proceeding, Mercer. You have no right. I got every right. You set the rules. Highest bidder wins. Mercer glanced at the Reverend. Count it. Reverend Thomas looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, but he bent down and started counting with shaking hands. It took him 3 minutes. When he straightened, he looked sick. $6,200, he said quietly. Going once, Mercer said, mocking the Reverend's earlier words. Going twice. He looked straight at Whitmore. Gone. For a second, Eleanor thought Whitmore would do something stupid. His hand drifted toward his coat where she knew he kept a pistol. But there were too many witnesses, and Mercer had positioned himself in a way that put Eleanor behind him, shielded. Whitmore's hand dropped. This isn't over. Yeah, it is, Mercer turned back to the Reverend. Marry us. Now wait just a... Whitmore started. Marry us. The Reverend looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, like he was asking permission for something. She didn't know what to say. This man, this stranger, this legend, this killer, had just kissed her and bought her like cattle and was demanding they be married right now, and her mind couldn't process any of it fast enough to form words.
But when she looked at Whitmore, saw the rage and possession in his face, felt the memory of his smile when he'd bid $5,000. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Marry us." The ceremony took 2 minutes. Eleanor barely heard it. She was too busy trying to understand what had just happened, what was happening, what it meant that a mountain outlaw had crashed a bride auction and claimed her like some kind of prize. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss the bride," Mercer didn't move, just looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "Already did." Then he took her hand, carefully, like he was worried she might break, and led her down the aisle toward the door. The crowd stayed frozen. Even Whitmore didn't move, though his face promised murder. Outside, the morning sun was too bright. Eleanor's eyes watered. Or maybe she was crying, hard to tell. A horse waited in the street, big bay gelding, already saddled. Mercer helped Eleanor up, then swung into the saddle behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady. "Hold on," he said. Then he kicked the horse into a run, and Cedar Falls disappeared behind them in a cloud of dust and unanswered questions. They rode hard for the first hour. The horse was strong, Mercer's riding was better, and they covered ground fast despite the double weight. Eleanor clung to the saddle horn, trying to process the fact that she was fleeing into the Montana wilderness with a man she'd met 10 minutes ago. A man who'd kissed her in front of half the territory. A man people called a killer. The adrenaline started wearing off around the time they left the main road. Her hands were cramping from gripping the saddle. Her ribs hurt where Mercer's arm held her steady, and her mind kept circling back to one question. Why? Why her? Why today? Why walk into that church and throw away $6,000 on a woman he didn't know? "We need to talk," she said. "Later." Now. Mercer didn't slow the horse, but she felt something change in how he sat. "You want to talk, or you want to get far enough away they can't follow us today?" Eleanor looked back. The road behind them was empty, but that didn't mean much. "How far are we going?" "Far enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting right now." Anger spiked through her fear. You don't get to..." She twisted in the saddle, trying to see his face. "You bought me. Like a horse. Like property. And now you're dragging me into the mountains without even telling me why?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "Would you rather I left you there?" "I'd rather have a choice." "You made your choice when you said yes to the Reverend." "That wasn't a choice. That was..." She stopped. Because what had it been? Desperation? Instinct? The split-second calculation that being owned by a stranger was better than being owned by Harold Whitmore? Mercer slowed the horse to a walk. They were climbing now, following a trail that wound through dense pine forest. The air had turned cooler, sharper. "Listen," he said, and his voice was quieter now, careful. "I know you're scared. I know this doesn't make sense, but I need you to trust me for about 6 more hours. Can you do that?" "Trust you? I don't even know you." "I know." Eleanor wanted to push, wanted to demand answers, but exhaustion was catching up with her. She'd barely slept in weeks. The fear and adrenaline that had kept her upright during the auction were burning off, leaving her hollow. She slumped back against Mercer's chest, too tired to fight. His arm tightened slightly around her waist. Not threatening, just steadying. 6 hours, she said. 6 hours, he agreed. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks when they finally stopped. They'd been climbing steadily all afternoon, following trails Eleanor wouldn't have recognized as trails if not for Mercer's steady navigation. The forest here was old growth, trees thick as houses, ground carpeted in pine needles that muffled the horses' hoofbeats. Mercer dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She grabbed the saddle for balance, waiting for the pins and needles feeling to pass. "There's a stream about 50 yards that way," Mercer said, pointing. "Water's clean. You want to wash up? Now's the time." Eleanor looked where he was pointing, then back at him. "You're not..." "I'll tend the horse. Take your time." She almost argued, but her face was grimy with trail dust and her mouth tasted like copper. She walked in the direction he'd indicated, moving carefully over the uneven ground. The stream was exactly where he'd said, water running clear and cold over smooth stones. Eleanor knelt and splashed her face, gasping at the temperature. But it felt good. Real. She cupped her hands and drank, then drank again, trying to wash away the taste of fear and exhaustion.
When she looked up, she saw her reflection in a still pool at the stream's edge. Pale face, tangled hair, eyes too wide. She barely recognized herself. Mrs. Eleanor Mercer, she thought, testing it. It sounded insane. She heard movement behind her and spun, heart hammering, but it was just Mercer leading the horse to drink. He'd removed the saddle and was rubbing the animal down with what looked like dried grass. "How much farther?" Eleanor asked. "Another hour, maybe less." "To where?" He glanced at her. "My place." "Your cabin?" "Yeah." Eleanor stood, brushing dirt off her dress. The cream cotton was ruined, torn at the hem and stained with horse sweat. "The one where you've been living alone for 7 years. Mercer didn't answer, which was answer enough. "And now you're bringing home a wife." "That's generally what happens when you get married. Generally, people know each other before they get married." He straightened, meeting her eyes across the stream. "You want to know why I did it?" "Yes." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he said, "Your father was Daniel Vale." Eleanor's breath caught. "You knew him?" "Met him once, 3 years ago. I came down to town for supplies, and he was the only person who'd speak to me. Sold me books. Asked if I was eating right. Told me—" He stopped, something painful crossing his face. "Told me isolation would kill me slower than any bullet." "That sounds like him," Eleanor said softly. "He was a good man. And I heard what happened. Heard about the debts and the auction and Whitmore sitting front row like a buyer at a cattle show." Mercer's hands clenched. "So I came down. For my father's memory. For what's right." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. This man, this killer, this outcast, had ridden into town and risked everything because her father had been kind to him once. It was either the most noble thing she'd ever heard or the most foolish. Probably both. "Thank you," she said. Mercer nodded once, then turned back to the horse. They rode the last hour in silence. The trail got steeper, rockier, until Eleanor wasn't sure how Mercer could even tell they were still on a path. But he guided the horse with easy confidence, never hesitating. Then the trees opened up, and Eleanor saw it. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, backed against a granite cliff face that rose at least 100 feet. It was bigger than she'd expected, single-story but long, built from logs so thick it would take 3 men to move one. The roof was split pine shingles, moss-covered but solid. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. There was a small corral attached to one side, empty except for a water trough, a woodshed, a covered porch running the length of the front, with what looked like hand-carved railings. It wasn't rough. It wasn't thrown together. It was a home. Mercer dismounted and helped Eleanor down. "Wait here," he said, then walked to the cabin door and went inside. Eleanor stood in the clearing, exhaustion and confusion, and about 17 other emotions fighting for space in her chest. She'd expected, what? A lean-to? A cave? Something that matched the wild man stories people told about Colt Mercer? Not this. Not a place that looked lived in and cared for and almost beautiful in the dying light. Mercer emerged a minute later, nodded to her. "Come on." Inside was even more surprising. The main room held a stone fireplace with a fire already burning, probably from this morning. A table and 2 chairs, handmade but well-crafted, sanded smooth. Shelves lined one wall filled with books. Eleanor recognized some of the spines. Her father's inventory. The floor was clean-swept wood. There were windows with actual glass. A door led to what looked like a separate bedroom. Another door hung open to show a root cellar. This wasn't a survival camp. This was a life. Mercer was watching her reaction. "It's not much." "It's—" Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence. Wasn't sure what word belonged there. He moved to the fireplace, added another log. "There's a bed in the back room. You should sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "The rest?" "How this works, the rules, what you—" He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't think past getting you out of that church. So we'll make it up as we go." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. He didn't have a plan. Didn't have this all mapped out. He was just as uncertain as she was, trying to do the right thing without knowing what right looked like. Okay? She said. Mercer looked relieved. Okay. But I have one question. All right. Eleanor met his eyes. Why did you kiss me? In the church. You could have just bid. You didn't have to. Had to make sure Whitmore knew, Mercer said simply. Knew what? His expression went hard. That you weren't available. That if he wanted you, he'd have to go through me first. He paused. And that I wasn't buying property. I was claiming my wife. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor should have been angry, should have been terrified, but standing in this warm cabin, looking at this scarred, careful man who'd upended his entire existence to save her from Harold Whitmore. What she felt was something else entirely, something she had no name for yet. I'll take the bed, she said quietly. Thank you. Mercer nodded and turned away, but not before Eleanor saw the relief in his face. She walked to the back room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, real mattress, real blankets that smelled like pine and wood smoke. Through the door, she could hear Mercer moving around the main room, banking the fire, settling in for the night. Her husband. The mountain killer. The man who'd saved her. Eleanor lay back, stared at the ceiling, and wondered what the hell happened next. Eleanor woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the air too clean, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back, the church, the auction, Mercer's kiss, the long ride into the mountains, and she sat up so fast her head spun. Pale light filtered through the small window. Dawn, maybe just past it. She was still wearing the ruined cream dress from yesterday, and every muscle in her body ached from hours on horseback. The axe sound came again, rhythmic, steady. Eleanor stood on shaky legs and walked to the main room. The fire had been rebuilt, coffee pot sitting on a metal grate over the flames. A plate waited on the table, bread, some kind of dried meat, and what looked like wild berries. A cup sat beside it, but no Mercer. She moved to the front window and looked out. He was about 30 yards from the cabin, splitting firewood with methodical efficiency. He'd removed his coat despite the morning chill, worked in just a dark shirt that was already damp with sweat. Even from this distance, she could see the play of muscle across his shoulders each time he brought the axe down. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a man doing morning chores. Eleanor poured herself coffee, black, strong enough to strip paint, and sat at the table. The bread was dense and slightly sweet, homemade. The meat was venison, she thought. The berries were tart and perfect. She was halfway through the meal when the door opened and Mercer came in, carrying an armload of split wood. He saw her at the table and stopped. You're up. Hard to sleep through all that chopping. Something that might have been embarrassment crossed his face. Sorry, wanted to get it done before the day heated up. He stacked the wood beside the fireplace with careful precision, then brushed bark chips off his shirt. When he turned back, he seemed uncertain what to do with his hands. Eleanor took a sip of coffee. This is good. The food, I mean. Thank you. There's more if you want it. I'm fine. She paused. Did you sleep? Some, which probably meant no. Eleanor studied him in the morning light. The scar on his face was more prominent now, a thick line that pulled slightly at the corner of his left eye. There were others too, one across his knuckles, another disappearing under his collar, a map of violence written on his skin. So, she said, what happens now? Mercer poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter. That's up to you. How is it up to me? You're the one who... She stopped, chose her words carefully. You bought me. Legally, I belong to you. His jaw tightened. You don't belong to anyone. The law says different. I don't care what the law says. He set his cup down harder than necessary. You want to leave? I'll take you to Billings. There's a train east. I'll give you money, enough to start over somewhere Whitmore can't touch you. Eleanor stared at him. You'd just let me go. It's your life. After spending $6,000, money doesn't matter. It matters to everyone. Not to me. Mercer met her eyes. I didn't buy you, Eleanor. I bought you out. There's a difference. The use of her first name startled her. He'd called her Miss Vale in the church, ma'am, on the ride up. But now it was just Eleanor,
said quietly, like he was testing how it felt.
She looked down at her coffee. I can't go to Billings. Whitmore has connections there. He has connections everywhere. Her hands tightened around the cup. And even if I could run, what would that accomplish? He'd just find another way to... She stopped, swallowed hard. My father is dead because he knew something. Something about Whitmore. I don't know what yet, but I'm going to find out. That's a good way to end up dead yourself.
Maybe, but at least I'd die doing something that matters instead of just running. Mercer studied her for a long moment. Then he said, Your father kept records about Whitmore's land deals, some of the foreclosures, the way debts got transferred, people who died at convenient times. Eleanor's head snapped up. How do you know that?
He told me. That day I bought books from him. Said he was documenting things, building a case. Asked if I'd seen anything unusual up in the mountains, water rights being diverted, survey markers moved, that kind of thing. And had you? Yeah, western edge of my property, there's a creek that feeds down into the valley. About 4 years ago, somebody tried to dam it. I tore the dam out 3 times before they stopped trying. He paused. Your father said it fit a pattern. Whitmore controlling water access, forcing people to buy from his wells or lose their crops. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Did my father say where he kept these records? No, but if he was smart, and he was, he wouldn't have kept them at home, too risky. Then where? Mercer shook his head. That's your mystery to solve. But if you're serious about going after Whitmore, you need to understand what you're up against. He's not just greedy, he's dangerous. People who get in his way have a habit of dying in accidents. Like my father. Like your father. Eleanor set her cup down, stood up. Then I need to learn how to not die. Can you teach me that? Mercer's eyebrows rose. Teach you what, exactly? How to survive, how to shoot, how to fight, how to... She gestured at the cabin, the forest beyond. How to live up here without depending on you for everything. You planning to stay? The question hung between them. Eleanor realized she'd already made the decision without consciously thinking about it. Going back down meant facing Whitmore. Running east meant abandoning her father's memory. But staying here, learning from Mercer, becoming strong enough to fight back. Yes, she said. I'm staying. If that's all right with you. Something shifted in Mercer's expression. Relief, maybe. Or something deeper that Eleanor didn't have a name for yet. It's all right with me, he said quietly. The first lesson started an hour later. After Eleanor had changed into clothes, Mercer scrounged from somewhere in the cabin. Canvas pants that had to be rolled at the ankles, a wool shirt 2 sizes too big, and a belt cinched tight enough to keep everything in place. She looked ridiculous. But she could move. Mercer led her to a clearing about 100 yards from the cabin. He'd set up a row of tin cans on a fallen log. You ever fired a gun? He asked. Once. My father taught me when I was 12. I shot a rifle and nearly broke my shoulder. Yeah, that happens. Mercer pulled a revolver from his belt. Colt Peacemaker, looked well used but maintained. This is easier. Less kick, but you still need to respect it. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. His hands guided hers, adjusting her grip, and Eleanor tried not to think about how warm they were or how close he was standing. Breathe out slow, he said. Fire between heartbeats. She did. The gun barked, louder than she expected, and the recoil snapped her wrist back. The shot went wide, didn't even come close to the cans. Again, Mercer said. She fired 5 more times, missed every shot. Frustration burned in her chest. This is useless. I can't. You're anticipating, flinching before you fire. He moved behind her, arms coming around to steady her hands. Stop thinking about the noise. Focus on the target. Eleanor tried to focus, but it was hard with Mercer's chest pressed against her back, his breath warm against her ear. She fired again. This time she clipped the edge of the log. Better, he said. They spent 2 hours at it. By the end, Eleanor's ears were ringing and her hands were shaking, but she'd managed to hit 1 can. Barely dented it, but it counted. Enough for today, Mercer said. You did good. Eleanor didn't feel like she'd done good. She felt exhausted and useless and angry at how hard something so simple could be. But when she looked at Mercer, she saw he meant it. No condescension, no pity, Just honest assessment. Tomorrow, we'll work on reloading faster, he said, and I'll show you how to clean it. Gun this dirty will jam when you need it most. Okay. Eleanor handed him the revolver. What else? What else what? What else do I need to learn? Mercer looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was serious. Whatever he saw on her face must have convinced him. Tracking, fire starting, basic medicine, how to field dress game, how to read weather, how to move quiet in the woods, how to... He stopped. It's a long list. Then we better get started. Over the next 3 weeks, Eleanor learned more than she'd thought possible. Mercer was a patient teacher when he bothered to talk, which wasn't often. Mostly he just showed her things once, maybe twice, then expected her to figure it out. She learned to start a fire with flint and steel, then with a bow drill when Mercer hit her flint. She learned to track deer by their droppings and rabbits by the way grass bent. She learned which plants were edible and which would kill her, which mushrooms were safe, and which would make her wish she was dead. She learned to move through the forest without snapping every branch, though she'd never be as quiet as Mercer. The man could walk through dry leaves and sound like wind. She learned to read the sky, recognize when clouds meant rain and when they meant something worse. She learned that aspens turning their leaves meant wind coming, that ravens gathering meant a kill nearby, that absolute silence meant predator, and she learned to shoot. Every morning, before anything else, they went to the clearing. Mercer would set up targets, cans, bottles, pieces of wood with charcoal marks. Eleanor would fire until her hands cramped. Reload, fire again. She got better. Slowly, frustratingly slowly, but better. By the second week, she could hit a can at 20 feet more often than not. By the third week, she could do it with a rifle too, though the recoil still made her shoulder ache. You're thinking too much, Mercer said one morning, watching her miss 3 shots in a row. It's not about perfect form, it's about making the shot when it matters. How am I supposed to do that? Stop practicing on targets. Start hunting. That afternoon, he took her into the deep woods. They moved slowly, Mercer reading signs Eleanor was just starting to recognize. Deer tracks in the soft earth, fresh scat, branches stripped of bark where a buck had rubbed his antlers. They found the deer an hour later, a young buck drinking from a creek. Mercer handed Eleanor the rifle without a word. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't a tin can. This was a living thing with a heartbeat and breath and eyes that would go empty if she pulled the trigger. Can't do it, she whispered. Yeah, you can. It's different. It's food. It's survival. Mercer's voice was quiet but firm. You want to make it up here, you need to understand what that costs. Eleanor raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel like he'd taught her. The buck's head came up, sensing something wrong. In another second, it would bolt. She fired. The buck dropped. Clean shot through the neck, dead before it hit the ground. Eleanor lowered the rifle, feeling sick. Good shot, Mercer said. Quick death, that matters. He taught her to field dress it right there, showed her how to open the body cavity without puncturing the organs, how to remove the heart and liver and kidneys. It was messy and horrible, and by the end, Eleanor's hands were red to the wrists. But that night, they ate venison steaks cooked over the fire, and Eleanor understood something she hadn't before. Death fed life up here. There was no room for squeamishness, no space for guilt. You survived or you didn't, and surviving meant making hard choices. The cabin became familiar. Eleanor learned its rhythms, how the floorboards creaked near the fireplace, how wind whistled through the gap under the door, how morning light hit the table at exactly the right angle for reading. She learned that Mercer woke before dawn every day and spent an hour just sitting on the porch with coffee, watching the forest wake up. She learned he carved things when he couldn't sleep, small figures, animals mostly, that he'd leave scattered around the cabin like he'd forgotten about them. She learned he was kind in ways that surprised her. When she struggled to chop firewood, he showed her the trick to finding the grain. When she burned dinner, again, he just ate it without comment and taught her how to season cast iron properly. When she woke gasping from nightmares about the auction, the church, Whitmore's smile, he'd call out from the main room, "You all right?" And when she said yes, he'd leave it alone, wouldn't push. They developed a routine. Mornings were for shooting and physical training, afternoons for practical skills, cooking, preserving food, maintaining equipment. Evenings they'd sit by the fire. Sometimes Mercer would read, books he'd collected over the years. Sometimes Eleanor would read aloud and he'd listen while carving. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, too tired for words. One night, 3 weeks in, Eleanor found herself studying him across the firelight. He was working on a carving, something that looked like a wolf, concentration making him look younger than his years. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "What really happened 7 years ago? The land war everyone talks about." His hand stilled. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set the carving aside. "I had a ranch," he said. "Small operation, but it was mine. My wife Sarah and I built it from nothing. We had a daughter, Emma. She was 4. His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it worse. "The land bordered Whitmore's holdings. There was a dispute about water rights. A creek ran through my property that fed into his. He wanted to dam it, control the flow. I said no." Eleanor's chest tightened. She knew where this was going. "His men came at night, set fire to the barn first. When I ran out to stop it, they—" He stopped, breathed carefully. "Sarah got Emma out of the house, tried to run for the tree line. They shot her in the back. She fell on top of Emma, tried to cover her." Another pause. "Didn't matter." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I killed 3 of them that night, wounded 2 more. Would have killed them all if I could have." He looked at her. "That's why I'm wanted. Not for defending my land, for shooting the men who murdered my family." "But they attacked you first. That's self-defense." Whitmore had witnesses who said different, had a judge who ruled in his favor, had enough money to make sure I hung if they ever caught me. Mercer's hands clenched. "So I ran, came up here, built this place. And I stayed because going down meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die yet. Wasn't sure what I was living for, but I wasn't ready to stop." Eleanor understood now. The isolation, the careful discipline, the way he'd built this cabin like a fortress against the world. He wasn't just hiding. He was surviving in the only way he knew how. "Your father's kindness meant something," Mercer said quietly. "Nobody'd treated me like a person in years. Then this old librarian sells me books and asks if I'm eating right, like I'm somebody worth worrying about." He met her eyes. "When I heard what Whitmore was doing to you, I had to—" "You saved me," Eleanor said. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to save someone. Couldn't save Sarah, couldn't save Emma, but I could save you." His voice roughened. "Selfish, probably. I don't think it's selfish to care. You didn't see me that night. What I did. What I'm capable of." Eleanor thought about that. About the violence he carried, the scars inside and out. "I've seen what Whitmore's capable of. I've seen what men do when they think they own the world, and I know which one I'd rather have watching my back." Mercer looked away, but not before she saw something raw in his expression. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief that she hadn't flinched. They didn't talk about it again, but something changed between them after that night. The careful distance they'd maintained started to close. Not physically. They still slept in separate rooms, still moved around each other with deliberate space, but in other ways. Eleanor started to notice things, the way Mercer's eyes tracked her when she moved through the cabin, making sure she was safe. The way he'd leave coffee warm when he knew she'd sleep late. The way he smiled, rare and quick, when she managed something he'd taught her. And she started to notice her own reactions. The way her pulse jumped when his hand brushed hers passing the water bucket. The way she looked for excuses to be near him. The way she'd caught herself watching him sleep one morning, studying the lines of his face in the early light and wondering what it would feel like to... She shut that thought down fast. This was survival. Partnership. Maybe friendship. Nothing more. Except it was starting to feel like something more. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, 4 weeks after Eleanor arrived. She was inside the cabin, attempting to repair a tear in one of Mercer's shirts. Her sewing was terrible but improving, when she heard the horse scream. Not whinny, scream. She dropped the shirt and ran for the door. Mercer was already moving from the woodshed, rifle in hand. His bay gelding was in the corral, eyes white with terror, backing against the far fence. Then Eleanor saw what had spooked it. The bear was massive, grizzly, probably 800 pounds, standing on its hind legs at the corral fence. Its fur was patchy, ribs showing through in places. This was an old bear, maybe sick, definitely desperate. Mercer raised the rifle. Get inside. Now. Eleanor didn't move. You can't kill it from there. The angle's wrong. It'll just wound it and make it angry. Eleanor, I'm not arguing. I'm right. The bear dropped to all fours, testing the corral fence with one massive paw. The wood creaked, but held. For now. Mercer swore under his breath. All right, I'm going to circle around, get a clear shot from the side. You stay here. If it comes at you, shoot for the head and pray. He moved before she could respond, slipping around the side of the cabin with that unnatural quiet. The bear's attention was still on the terrified horse, but that would change the second Mercer fired. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she pulled the revolver from her belt. She'd started carrying it everywhere after the first week. 6 shots. Against a grizzly, that might as well be nothing. The bear lunged at the fence. Wood splintered. The horse screamed again, and Eleanor saw Mercer rise from cover, rifle to his shoulder. The shot cracked across the clearing. The bear roared, hurt but not dead. It spun toward Mercer with terrifying speed, dropped to all fours and charged. Eleanor didn't think. Just raised the revolver and fired 3 times at the bear's flank, trying to draw its attention, buy Mercer time to reload. It worked. The bear veered toward her instead, covering ground impossibly fast. 20 yards. 15. 10. Mercer's second shot took it in the shoulder. The bear stumbled but kept coming, momentum carrying it forward. 5 yards now, close enough Eleanor could see the yellow stain on its teeth, smell the rot on its breath. She fired her last 3 shots directly into its face. The bear crashed to the ground 6 feet from where she stood, close enough that blood spattered across her boots. It twitched once, twice, then went still. Eleanor's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, revolver hanging loose in her hand, ears ringing from the gunfire. Mercer was there a second later, kneeling beside her. You hurt? No, I'm fine. He checked her over anyway, looking for injuries she might not have felt yet. When he was satisfied, he sat back on his heels. That was the dumbest, bravest thing I've ever seen. You're welcome. I told you to stay back. And I told you the angle was wrong. Eleanor looked at the dead bear, felt her stomach roll. Is it over? Yeah, it's over. But she could see it wasn't. Not really. The bear had been starving, desperate enough to attack in daylight. That meant something had disrupted the normal food chain. Could be natural, bad berry season, salmon run failed. Could be something else. Mercer seemed to be thinking the same thing. He stood, offered Eleanor his hand. Come on, let's get you inside. What about... She gestured at the bear. I'll deal with it. You did your part. Inside the cabin, Eleanor's hands finally started shaking in earnest. She'd killed something, again. But this time it had been trying to kill her back, and that made it different somehow. More real. More terrifying. She poured water with trembling hands, drank, then sat at the table and put her head down. When Mercer came in an hour later, he found her like that. He didn't say anything, just put a hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was warm and steady, and exactly what she needed. First time's always hard, he said quietly. Second time, she corrected. The deer. That was different. This was kill or die. Your body knows the difference. Eleanor lifted her head. Does it get easier? No, but you get stronger. She wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe she could become someone who didn't fall apart after every crisis. But right now she felt small and scared and very far from strong. Mercer squeezed her shoulder once, then moved to the counter, started making something that smelled like stew. They ate in silence, and afterward Eleanor fell into bed fully clothed and slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke, she found fresh coffee waiting and a note on the table in rough handwriting. Proud of you. See, she folded the note carefully and tucked it inside the pocket of her father's copy of Whitman, the one book she'd managed to grab before leaving Cedar Falls. Then she went outside and practiced shooting until her hands didn't shake anymore. That night, they sat on the porch in the cooling darkness. Stars were coming out, more than Eleanor had ever seen. The sky up here was different, clear, deeper, like you could fall up into it. I found something, she said, in the cabin, behind the books. Mercer went very still. What kind of something? Letters, hidden in a gap between the logs. From a bank clerk named Thomas Morrison. He worked for Whitmore. Worked? Past tense. The last letter is dated 2 months before he died. Fell off his horse, supposedly. Broke his neck. Eleanor pulled the letters from her pocket. He was documenting fraud. Fake loan documents, forged signatures, people being charged for debts that didn't exist. And he mentions my father, says Daniel Vale was helping him build a case. Mercer took the letters, read them by starlight. His face went hard. This is what got your father killed.
I think my father had more.
The actual evidence Morrison was talking about. Documents, ledgers, something that could prove what Whitmore was doing. And you think it's hidden somewhere in Cedar Falls? It has to be. My father wouldn't have destroyed it. He spent years collecting it. Mercer handed the letters back. You're talking about going back down there? Eventually, not yet, but yes. That's suicide, Eleanor. Maybe, but it's the only way to stop him. They sat in silence while the stars wheeled overhead. Finally, Mercer said, Then we do it right. We plan. We prepare. And we don't go until you're ready. We? You think I'm letting you walk into that alone? Eleanor's throat tightened. You'd risk that? Going back down after all this time? I'm already risking it. Married you in front of half the territory, remember? Whitmore's not going to forget that. He's probably already sent men looking for us. Mercer looked at her. We're in this together now, like it or not. I like it, Eleanor said quietly. Mercer smiled just a little. In the darkness, it made him look younger, less haunted. Then we train harder, he said, because when we go down, we're going to burn Whitmore's empire to the ground and walk away alive. Both of us. Eleanor believed him, and for the first time since her father died, she felt something other than fear and grief. She felt ready. They spent the next 2 months preparing for war. Mercer built a second gun platform on the north side of the cabin, concealed behind stacked firewood but offering clear sightlines down the main approach trail. He showed Eleanor how to reload in darkness, how to estimate distance without thinking, how to shoot while moving. She practiced until her fingers bled, and then practiced more. He taught her to set traps, not the kind that killed animals, but the kind that warned you when something human was coming. Tripwires connected to tin cans filled with pebbles, false trails that led into box canyons, marks on trees that looked natural but told you which direction someone had passed. You're preparing for a siege, Eleanor said one afternoon, watching him reinforce the cabin's window shutters with iron bars he'd forged himself. I'm preparing for reality. Whitmore's had 2 months to get angry. Anger makes men stupid, but it also makes them dangerous. Eleanor couldn't argue with that. She'd been having nightmares about the banker, his smile in the church, the possessive way he'd looked at her, the cold certainty in his eyes that she belonged to him. Men like that didn't accept defeat. They just got creative about revenge. But the waiting was eating at her. Every day that passed felt like time wasted, justice delayed. Her father's killer was down in Cedar Falls living free while she hid in the mountains learning to shoot. I want to go back, she said one night. They were cleaning rifles by lamplight, a routine that had become almost meditative. Not permanently, just to look. See if I can find where my father hid the evidence. Mercer didn't look up from the gun he was oiling. Too risky. Everything's risky. Staying here is risky. Different kind of risk. You go down there, Whitmore will know within an hour. He's got eyes everywhere. Then I'll be careful. Careful doesn't matter when you're outnumbered 50-1. He set the rifle aside, met her eyes. I know you're frustrated, but rushing gets you killed. Eleanor wanted to throw something. Instead, she focused on the revolver in her hands, checking the cylinder for the 100th time. My father didn't rush. He spent years building his case, and he still ended up dead at the bottom of the stairs. Yeah, which is why we're not making his mistakes. What mistakes? Being patient? Being careful? That's what you keep telling me to do. Mercer's jaw tightened. His mistake was working alone, not telling anyone what he knew. When they came for him, nobody even questioned it because nobody knew there was anything to question. The truth of that hit Eleanor hard. Her father had died alone, and his secrets had died with him. Or almost died. If not for the bank clerk's letters hidden in Mercer's cabin, she'd have nothing. Then we don't work alone, she said. We find allies, people who hate Whitmore as much as we do. And who would that be? Everyone in Cedar Falls is either scared of him or working for him. Not everyone. Rose Sullivan fought back at the auction. Mary Hutchins didn't want to be there. Catherine Chen... She stopped. What happened to them? The other women. Mercer looked uncomfortable. I heard things. When I went down for supplies last month. What things? Mary Hutchins ran away from her husband after 2 weeks. Nobody knows where she went. Rose Sullivan's husband died in a bar fight, stabbed by someone who disappeared before the sheriff could investigate. And Catherine Chen burned down her husband's mine office and left town. Eleanor felt something fierce and glad rise in her chest. So they fought back. Or they got lucky. There's a difference. Is there? Eleanor set down the revolver. Maybe luck is just what happens when you refuse to give up. Mercer studied her face for a long moment. You've changed since that first night. Good. I needed to change. I didn't say it was bad. His voice was quiet. Just different. You're not scared anymore. I'm terrified all the time. I just got better at ignoring it. He smiled at that, rare expression that changed his whole face. Yeah, that's basically courage. They went back to cleaning guns, but Eleanor's mind was already working. She needed information, needed to know what Whitmore was doing, whether he was looking for them, what his next move might be. And she needed to find out where her father had hidden his evidence. The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days later, Eleanor was checking the trap lines Mercer had set for small game when she heard a horse approaching. Not the careful, quiet approach of someone trying to sneak up. This was deliberate, loud enough to announce itself. She pulled the revolver and moved toward the sound, keeping to cover. Mercer appeared from the other direction, rifle ready, and they converged near the main trail just as the rider came into view. It was a woman, young, maybe 19, riding a chestnut mare that looked ready to drop from exhaustion. The woman herself wasn't much better, dressed torn and dirty, face pale, dark circles under her eyes. Eleanor stepped out from cover. Mary? Mary Hutchins nearly fell off the horse. Eleanor caught her, and Mercer was there a second later, taking the horse's reins and helping both women toward the cabin. Inside, they got Mary settled at the table. Mercer brought water while Eleanor built up the fire. Mary drank like she'd been in the desert for a week, then slumped forward with her head in her hands. I didn't know where else to go, she said, voice hoarse. I've been riding for 2 days straight. From where? Eleanor asked. Billings. I got work in a hotel there, cleaning rooms. Thought I was safe. Mary looked up and her eyes were haunted. Whitmore's men came looking for me yesterday. The hotel owner told me I should probably leave before they came back. Mercer swore quietly. How'd they find you? I don't know. I was careful. Didn't use my real name. Didn't talk to anyone about where I came from. Mary's hands were shaking. But they knew. They had my description, knew about the auction, everything. Eleanor felt ice in her stomach. Did they say what they wanted? They said Mr. Whitmore had questions about the day of the auction. About you. Mary looked at Eleanor. About whether you went willingly with Colt Mercer or if you were taken by force. Building a case, Mercer said. Probably filed kidnapping charges. Gives him legal cover to send bounty hunters. That's what I thought, too. Mary pulled a folded paper from inside her dress. So I stole this from the hotel desk. One of Whitmore's men left it there when he went to use the privy. Eleanor unfolded the paper. It was a wanted poster. Crude drawing of Mercer's face above text that read, Wanted for kidnapping and murder. Colt Mercer. $2,000 reward. Armed and dangerous. Murder? Eleanor's voice came out sharper than intended. Who'd he supposedly kill? Doesn't say. Maybe he just added it for effect. Mary wrapped her arms around herself. Eleanor, he's coming for you. He's convinced everyone you were stolen from him that you need to be rescued. He's got the whole territory believing he's some kind of hero trying to save a kidnapped bride. Mercer took the poster, studied it with a blank expression that told Eleanor he'd been expecting something like this. How long before they track you here? I don't know. I tried to cover my trail, but I'm not good at this. If they ask the right questions in the right towns. Mary's voice broke. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I've probably led them straight to you. No. Eleanor took Mary's hand. You did the right thing. We needed to know. They gave Mary the bed and told her to sleep. She was unconscious within minutes, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Mercer and Eleanor sat at the table in the dim lamplight, the wanted poster between them. $2,000 is enough to bring every hunter in Montana, Mercer said quietly. Professional men, the kind who don't quit just because it's hard. How long do we have? A week. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. He looked at her. You could still leave. Take Mary. Head east to Seattle or San Francisco. I'd give you enough money to... Stop. Eleanor's voice was hard. I'm not leaving. We talked about this. That was before there was a price on my head. There's always been a price on your head. This is just higher. She leaned forward. Besides, this changes things. Whitmore's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Or they get more dangerous. Both. But it means he's worried. Why else go to this much trouble? Eleanor tapped the poster. He could have just let it go. Married someone else at the next auction. But instead he's spending money on bounty hunters and wanted posters. Why? Mercer thought about that. Your father's evidence. He thinks you know where it is. Or he's afraid I'll figure it out. Eleanor stood, started pacing. My father was methodical. If he hid something, he'd hide it somewhere meaningful, somewhere I'd think to look, but Whitmore wouldn't. Like where? I don't know yet. But Mary coming here, that's not an accident, that's an opportunity. She turned to face him. She worked in his house, didn't she, before the auction? Housekeeper's daughter, I think. Then she knows the layout, knows his routines, knows things we don't. Eleanor felt pieces clicking together in her mind. And she's motivated. He destroyed her life. She wants payback as much as we do. She's a kid. She's a survivor. There's a difference. Mercer stood, moved to the window and looked out at the darkness. You're talking about using her, putting her at risk. I'm talking about giving her a choice. Same choice you gave me. Eleanor joined him at the window. You could have just handed me money and pointed me at Billings, but you didn't. You let me stay. Let me learn. Let me become someone who could fight back. Mary deserves the same. And if she says no, then we help her get somewhere safe and we figure out another plan. Eleanor put her hand on his arm. But I don't think she'll say no. She was right. When Mary woke the next morning, Eleanor laid out the situation. Whitmore's pursuit, the evidence they needed to find, the risks involved in going after him. Mary listened without interrupting, face unreadable. When Eleanor finished, Mary was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to help. It's dangerous, Eleanor warned. If we do this wrong, we all die. I'm already in danger. At least this way I'd be doing something about it instead of just running. Mary's jaw set. He took everything from me. My father, my home, my choice. I want him to pay for that. Mercer looked skeptical. You know how to shoot? No. Track? Fight? Survive in rough country? No to all of it. But I can learn. Mary met his eyes. I'm not useless. I know things about Whitmore you don't, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Over the next week, the cabin became a war room. Mary drew maps of Cedar Falls from memory, streets, buildings, who lived where. She sketched the layout of Whitmore's house, including a detail that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. There's a study on the second floor, Mary said, charcoal moving across paper. Nobody's allowed inside except Whitmore and his business associates. The housekeeper tried to clean it once and got fired for it. What's he hiding in there? Eleanor asked. I don't know. But when I brought tea up sometimes, I'd see papers everywhere, ledgers, documents, file boxes stacked in the corners. Eleanor and Mercer exchanged glances. That's where he'd keep records, Eleanor said. Evidence of the fraudulent loans, the foreclosures, everything. Maybe, Mercer said. Or maybe it's just regular business papers. Either way, getting into that house is suicide. But Mary was shaking her head. Not if you time it right. Every Wednesday evening, Whitmore meets with the town council at the Grand Hotel. He's gone for at least 3 hours, sometimes more, and he only keeps 2 men at the house when he's out. One at the front door, one patrolling the grounds. 2 men you'd have to get past without raising alarm, Mercer pointed out. Or create a distraction, Eleanor said. An idea was forming. What if we gave them something else to worry about? Over the next few days, they refined the plan. It was risky and complicated and had about a dozen ways to go wrong, but it was also their best shot at getting what they needed. The key was timing and information, and one very specific skill that Eleanor had been practicing without quite knowing why. Mercer had been teaching her to pick locks. It started almost as a game. He'd found an old padlock in his supplies and showed her how to manipulate the pins with bent wire. She'd been terrible at first, all fumbling fingers and frustration. But like everything else up here, she'd gotten better with practice. "Why are you teaching me this?" she'd asked one afternoon, after finally managing to pop a lock open on the 5th try. "Never know when it'll come in handy," Mercer had said, "and it teaches patience. Feel instead of force." Now she understood. Her father's evidence might be locked away. Getting to it might require skills beyond just shooting and surviving. They spent 2 weeks preparing. Mary learned to shoot. She was a faster study than Eleanor had been, with steadier hands and better focus. Mercer taught them both to move quietly, to stay low, to use shadows. Eleanor practiced lockpicking until she could open most simple mechanisms in under a minute. And they gathered intelligence. Mercer made 2 careful trips down to settlements near Cedar Falls, listening to gossip, tracking the movements of Whitmore's men. What he learned wasn't encouraging. "He's got at least a dozen men looking for us," Mercer reported after the second trip. "Mostly locals who need the money. But there's 3 professional bounty hunters who came in from Denver last week. They're asking the right questions, checking the mountain trails." "How long?" Eleanor asked. "Could be tomorrow, could be a month. But they're getting closer," which meant they were running out of time to make their move. The decision to go was made on a Thursday evening. They'd been at the cabin for almost 3 months now. Eleanor had changed so much she barely recognized the terrified girl who'd stood on that auction block. She was harder now, leaner. Her hands were calloused from work. Her aim was steady, and she'd killed 2 more animals for food without hesitation. But more than that, she'd found something up here she hadn't expected. Not just survival skills or physical strength. She'd found purpose and partnership, and something else that kept her awake at night wondering what it would be like if Mercer kissed her again. Really kissed her, not as a statement to Whitmore, but because he wanted to. She didn't let herself think about that too much. There was work to do. "We go Wednesday," Eleanor said. "Mary and I will handle the house. You'll be our lookout and exit strategy." Mercer didn't like it. That much was obvious from his expression. But he also understood that this wasn't his choice to make. Eleanor had to do this. Had to face Whitmore's domain and take back what he'd stolen. "Rules," he said. "You're in and out in 30 minutes maximum. If anything goes wrong, you abort. And if you get caught, we won't get caught. If you get caught," he continued firmly, "you tell them I forced you, that I threatened Mary, that you're both victims. Understand?" Eleanor wanted to argue, but she saw the fear behind his eyes. He'd already lost one wife to Whitmore's violence. She wasn't going to make him watch another woman die. "Understood," she said quietly. They rode down on Tuesday, taking the long route that avoided the main trails. Mercer knew these mountains like his own heartbeat, and he guided them through passes Eleanor wouldn't have believed horses could navigate. They camped that night in a hollow 5 miles outside Cedar Falls. No fire, taking turns on watch. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Every sound made her reach for the revolver at her hip. Every shadow looked like armed men coming to kill them. But dawn came without incident, and by Wednesday afternoon they were in position. Mercer had found them a vantage point on a hill overlooking Whitmore's house. It was a massive structure by frontier standards. 2 stories, painted white, with a wraparound porch and manicured gardens that looked obscene in this rough country. "There," Mary whispered, pointing. "That window on the 2nd floor, 3rd from the left. That's the study." Eleanor studied it through the small telescope Mercer had brought. The window was closed, but she could see bookshelves inside and, yes, stacks of papers. "Guard positions," Mercer said, scanning with his own scope. "One at the front door, like Mary said. Second one is there, southeast corner, walking the perimeter." They watched the guards' patterns for 2 hours, timing the intervals. Every 12 minutes, the perimeter guard would be on the far side of the house. That would give them maybe 90 seconds to get from the tree line to the back door. "Cutting it close," Mercer muttered. "It'll work," Eleanor said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. As the sun dropped toward the mountains, they saw Whitmore emerge from the house. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized his walk, self-assured, proprietary, like he owned the very ground beneath his feet. A carriage waited out front. He climbed in, and it rolled toward town. "That's our cue," Mercer said. "Wait for full dark, then move."
The next 2 hours were the longest of Eleanor's life. They couldn't risk a fire, couldn't risk talking above whispers. They just waited while the sky turned from blue to purple to black, and stars began to emerge. Finally, Mercer touched Eleanor's shoulder. Time. The three of them moved down the hill in silence. Eleanor's heart was hammering so hard she was sure the guards would hear it. The revolver at her hip felt both too heavy and not heavy enough. They reached the tree line. Ahead, the house glowed with lamplight from the ground floor windows. Eleanor could see the front guard standing on the porch, smoking. "Wait for it," Mercer breathed. The perimeter guard appeared from the east side of the house, walking his route. They counted silently as he moved around the corner, out of sight. "Now," Mercer said. Eleanor and Mary ran. Not sprint, that would make noise, but fast, low, using the shadows. Eleanor's legs burned. Her breath came short. The distance felt infinite, even though it was maybe 50 yards. They reached the back door. Eleanor pulled out the lockpicks, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. Focus. Feel instead of force. She inserted the tension wrench, worked the pick, and click. The door opened. They slipped inside and Mary eased it shut behind them. They were in a kitchen, dark and silent. Through the doorway, Eleanor could see a hallway leading toward the front of the house. Mary pointed up. They moved toward the stairs, every footstep sounding impossibly loud against the hardwood. Eleanor expected the front guard to burst in at any second, expected gunfire and shouting and death. But nothing happened. They reached the second-floor hallway. Mary pointed to the third door on the left. The study door was locked. Better locked than the back door, but Eleanor had practiced on a dozen different mechanisms. She worked the picks, sweat running down her back despite the cool evening air. The lock turned. They were in. The study was exactly as Mary described. Papers everywhere, file boxes stacked against one wall, a massive desk dominating the center. Eleanor pulled a small lantern from her pack and lit it with shaking hands, keeping the flame low. "What are we looking for?" Mary whispered. "Anything with my father's name, or the bank clerk's, Thomas Morrison, or records of fraudulent loans." Eleanor started with the desk while Mary took the file boxes. 5 minutes passed. 10. Eleanor found loan documents, but nothing obviously fraudulent. Mary found correspondence between Whitmore and various business associates, but nothing incriminating. 15 minutes. Eleanor's hands were sweating. They needed to get out soon or risk the guard rotation. Then she found it. Not on the desk, not in the files, but in a hidden compartment in the bottom drawer, revealed only when she pulled the drawer completely out and saw the false bottom. Inside was a leather portfolio. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting, page after page of it, documenting dates, amounts, names, people who'd been forced off their land, mysterious deaths that coincided with property transfers, witnesses who'd been paid to lie. And at the center of it all, a web showing how Whitmore had systematically stolen land from over 50 families in the past decade. "This is it," Eleanor breathed. "This is everything." Mary was beside her now, looking at the documents. "That's enough to hang him. Why would he keep it here?" "Pride, maybe. Or insurance. Proof of what he's done in case anyone tries to cross him." Eleanor closed the portfolio. "Either way, we've got it now." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Both women froze. Eleanor's hand went to her revolver. The door swung open. But it wasn't a guard standing there. It was Harold Whitmore himself, pistol in hand, smile on his face like he'd just won the best hand of poker in his life. "Hello, Eleanor," he said pleasantly. "I've been waiting for you." Eleanor's hand was already moving toward her revolver when Whitmore raised his pistol higher. "I wouldn't," he said, voice still pleasant, like they were discussing the weather. "Mary, dear, please remove Eleanor's weapon. Slowly." Mary's face had gone white as paper. Her hand shook as she reached for Eleanor's gun. "Don't," Eleanor said. "Do it," Whitmore commanded, and there was iron beneath the courtesy now. "Or I'll shoot her in the knee and you can watch her bleed while we talk." Mary took the revolver. Her eyes were streaming tears, but her hands were steady enough. "Good girl. Now step away from Mrs. Mercer. Over there, by the window." Whitmore gestured with his pistol. "You've both been very busy, breaking into my home, stealing my property.
He nodded toward the leather portfolio Eleanor was still clutching. That's theft, you know. Serious crime. It's not your property, Eleanor said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. It's evidence of murder and fraud and nothing that will ever see the inside of a courtroom. Whitmore took a step into the room. He was dressed for the council meeting. Expensive suit, gold watch chain, hair perfectly combed. Only his eyes betrayed the anger beneath the civilized surface. Did you really think I'd leave something that valuable unguarded? That I wouldn't have men watching this house even when I'm gone? Eleanor's stomach dropped. You knew we were coming. I suspected. When little Mary here showed up at that hotel in Billings, I had someone follow her. Very sloppy trail, my dear. Led my men straight to Mercer's cabin. They've been watching you for 2 weeks, waiting to see what you'd do. He smiled. I must say, this is better than I hoped. Both of you, caught red-handed, breaking and entering, theft. And poor Eleanor, clearly coerced by that mountain savage into a life of crime. Nobody coerced me into anything. That's not what the witnesses will say. The whole territory knows Mercer kidnapped you from the church, forced you into marriage. It's really quite tragic. Whitmore's smile widened. But don't worry. Once he's hanged for kidnapping and you're freed from his influence, I'm sure you'll see reason. We can have a proper wedding, start fresh. Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat. I'd rather die. That can be arranged too, but it seems wasteful. He glanced at Mary. As for you, Miss Hutchins, you're an accomplice to felony theft. That's 10 years in territorial prison if you're lucky. Unless, of course, you cooperate. Tell the judge how Mercer threatened you, how Eleanor was clearly under duress, how you were both innocent victims. Mary's jaw clenched. Go to hell. Hell is a children's story, my dear. Prison is real. 10 years of hard labor, terrible food, women who will make your wedding night look gentle by comparison. He let that sink in. Or you walk free, testify against Mercer, and I'll even give you a job in one of my businesses. Your choice. She's not testifying to anything, Eleanor said, because you're not taking either of us anywhere. Whitmore laughed, genuine amusement that made Eleanor's skin crawl. And how exactly do you plan to stop me? You're unarmed, trapped in my house. I have 6 armed men surrounding this building. He pulled a watch from his vest, checked it. In fact, they should be moving into position right about... The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor as Mercer came through in a crash of wood and fury, rifle in his hands. He hit the floor rolling, came up in a crouch with the barrel pointed at Whitmore's head. Drop it, Mercer said. For a second, Eleanor thought Whitmore would be stupid enough to try something. His pistol was still raised, still pointed at Eleanor, but he was looking at Mercer now, at the absolute certainty in his eyes that said he'd pull the trigger without hesitation. Whitmore lowered the gun. Didn't drop it, but lowered it. There's the beast himself, Whitmore said. Right on schedule. Tell me, Mercer, how does it feel knowing you walked into a trap? About as good as you're going to feel when I put a bullet between your eyes. You won't. Too many witnesses, too much noise. My men heard that window break. They're already coming. Whitmore's smile never wavered. You might get me, might even get out of this room, but you won't make it out of this house, and Eleanor and Mary will hang for your crimes. Eleanor saw Mercer's finger tighten on the trigger. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd do it anyway. Just shoot Whitmore and damn the consequences. But Mercer's eyes flicked to her just for an instant, and she saw the calculation there. Saw him weighing her life against revenge. Eleanor, Mercer said quietly, not looking away from Whitmore. The portfolio. You have it? Yes. Then we're leaving, all 3 of us. You're not going anywhere, Whitmore said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice now. He'd expected Mercer to shoot or surrender, not negotiate. Here's what's going to happen, Mercer said. You're going to tell your men to stand down. We're going to walk out of here, and if anyone tries to stop us, I'll kill you first. Then I'll kill as many of your men as I can before they bring me down. Either way, you're dead. You'd sacrifice yourself? Without hesitation. The certainty in Mercer's voice made it true. Eleanor could see Whitmore processing that, trying to find an angle, a way to regain control. And what about your wife? Whitmore asked. You willing to sacrifice her too? Because if shooting starts, she's right in the crossfire. I'm not his hostage, Eleanor said. She'd been slowly moving while they talked, positioning herself closer to Mary, closer to the door. I'm his partner, and I've gotten pretty good at shooting too. She snatched a revolver from Mary's trembling hands and pointed it at Whitmore's chest. Her hands were steady. 3 months ago they would have been shaking. Now they were rock solid. Whitmore's expression finally cracked. Anger flashed across his face, pure and undisguised. You ungrateful little— Call your men off, Eleanor interrupted. Now, or my husband puts a bullet in you and I'll deal with whoever comes through that door. For a long moment, nobody moved. The standoff hung balanced on a knife edge. Then heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, voices calling out. Whitmore's reinforcements were coming. Whitmore smiled again. Too late. Mercer fired. Not at Whitmore. At the oil lamp on the desk. It exploded in a shower of burning fuel that spread across the papers, the curtains, racing up the wall with terrifying speed. Move, Mercer shouted. Eleanor grabbed Mary's arm and ran for the door. Mercer was right behind them, keeping his rifle pointed back at Whitmore. The banker scrambled backward, trying to avoid the flames, shouting for help. They hit the hallway as armed men reached the top of the stairs. Mercer fired once, twice, not trying to kill, just forcing them back down. Eleanor and Mary ran for the back staircase Mary had mentioned, the servants' route that led to the kitchen. Behind them, the study was an inferno. Smoke poured into the hallway. Someone was screaming, Whitmore, Eleanor realized, screaming about the documents, the evidence, everything burning. They made it to the kitchen. The back door was still unlocked from their entry. They burst through into the night air and ran for the tree line. Gunfire erupted behind them. Wood splintered from the doorframe. Eleanor heard a bullet whine past her ear, way too close. She fired back blindly, not aiming, just trying to slow their pursuit. Then they were in the trees, and Mercer was leading them through the darkness with the sure-footedness of someone who'd spent years learning to navigate by starlight. Eleanor clutched the leather portfolio to her chest and ran, branches whipping her face, lungs burning. They ran for 20 minutes before Mercer finally slowed. They were deep in the forest now, well off any trail Eleanor could recognize. Behind them, the glow of fire painted the sky orange. Whitmore's house was burning. Did we— Mary gasped for breath. Did we just burn down his house? Some of it, Mercer said. He was checking their back trail, rifle ready. Might have been the whole thing if we're lucky. Eleanor collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with her. The portfolio. I still have it. Good, because that's the only reason we're not going back to kill him properly. He knew, Eleanor said. He knew we were coming, had it all planned. Yeah, which means someone's been talking, or his men are better trackers than I gave them credit for. Mercer looked at Mary. You sure you weren't followed? I thought I was sure. Mary's voice was small, devastated. I tried so hard to be careful. Not your fault. Whitmore's got resources we don't. Mercer pulled out a canteen, passed it to Eleanor. Drink. We've got a hard ride ahead of us. They'd hidden the horses 2 miles out, in a ravine Mercer knew. The animals were restless but unharmed. They mounted up, Mary riding double with Eleanor, and headed deeper into the mountains. They rode through the night, putting distance between themselves and Cedar Falls. Eleanor dozed in the saddle a few times, jolting awake when the horse stumbled, but Mercer never seemed to tire. He navigated like he could see in the dark, finding paths Eleanor would have missed in broad daylight. Dawn found them at a high mountain lake, crystal clear and cold enough to make Eleanor's teeth ache when she splashed her face. They made a cold camp, no fire that could give away their position, and ate dried meat while studying the portfolio's contents in the growing light. It was worse than Eleanor had imagined. Her father and the bank clerk had documented everything, names, dates, amounts. 53 families destroyed. 12 suspicious deaths that all benefited Whitmore's land acquisitions. Forged documents. Bribed officials. A territorial judge who was on Whitmore's payroll. This is enough, Mary said, reading over Eleanor's shoulder. This could destroy him. If we can get it to someone who matters, Mercer said. Problem is, most of the law in this territory is either scared of Whitmore or paid by him. Then we go higher, Eleanor said. Federal judge, federal marshal, someone outside his reach. Nearest federal judge is in Helena, 3 days' ride, and Whitmore will have men on every road between here and there. Eleanor studied the documents. Her father's handwriting looked shaky in places, like he'd been writing in fear or exhaustion, But he'd been thorough, methodical. He'd built a case that could stand up in any honest court. "There's a federal judge staying at the Grand Hotel," Mary said suddenly. "I heard Whitmore mention it during the council meeting. Judge Carson. He's doing a circuit, hearing cases in different towns." Mercer's head snapped up. "In Cedar Falls?" "He was supposed to arrive yesterday, staying through the end of the week." Eleanor felt pieces clicking together. "That's why Whitmore was so confident. He's got a federal judge right there, probably already bought and paid for. He could have had us arrested, had a trial, and hanged us all legal-like before anyone questioned it. Or the judge is honest and Whitmore's planning to work around him." Mercer was thinking. Eleanor could see it in his eyes. Either way, a federal judge in town changes things. "We have to get this evidence to him," Eleanor said. "Tonight, if possible, before Whitmore can spin whatever story he's planning." "That's suicide. Town will be crawling with his men after what we just did." "Then we don't go through town. We go straight to the hotel." Mary shook her head. "The Grand Hotel is in the middle of Cedar Falls. There's no way to get there without being seen. During the day, sure. But at night, when everyone's looking for us in the mountains?" Eleanor looked at Mercer. "You said it yourself. They'll expect us to run, to hide, not to go right back into the lion's den." Mercer studied her face for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely. My father spent years building this case. He died for it. I'm not going to waste that by running away and hoping someone eventually believes us." Eleanor's voice hardened. "We take this evidence to Judge Carson tonight. We make him listen, and we end this. And if the judge is corrupt, if he's already working for Whitmore, then we improvise, but at least we tried. At least." Mary was looking between them like they'd both lost their minds. "This is crazy. You're talking about riding back into a town full of people who want you dead." "Yes," Eleanor said simply, "to deliver evidence to a judge who might arrest you on sight." "Yes. And if it goes wrong, we all die." Eleanor met Mary's eyes. "If it goes wrong, we die fighting instead of hiding. I can live with that. Can you?" Mary looked scared. Terrified, actually. But beneath the fear, Eleanor saw something else. The same anger that had made her fight her husband at the auction. The same defiance that had made her ride 2 days straight to warn them. "All right," Mary said quietly. "I'm in." They spent the day planning. Mercer scouted the approaches to Cedar Falls, mapped out where Whitmore's men were likely to be posted. Mary drew detailed layouts of the Grand Hotel, entrances, exits, which rooms would be occupied. Eleanor studied her father's evidence until she'd memorized the key points. If they got in front of Judge Carson, she'd have maybe 5 minutes to make the case before Whitmore's men found them. She needed to be ready. As the sun dropped toward the western peaks, Mercer made them all check their weapons. Eleanor's revolver was fully loaded. Mary had a small pistol Mercer had given her, though she still shot like someone who'd only been practicing for 3 weeks. "Rules," Mercer said, looking at both women. "We stay together. If shooting starts, you get to cover and stay there until I say move. If I go down—" "You're not going down," Eleanor interrupted. "If I go down, you grab the evidence and run. Get it to the judge or die trying, but don't stop to help me. Understood?" Eleanor wanted to argue, but she saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear he'd had when talking about his first wife and daughter, the terror of losing someone else. "Understood," she said quietly. They rode out as darkness fell. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by, which was both a blessing and a curse. Harder for Whitmore's men to spot them, also harder to navigate. But Mercer knew these mountains. He led them down by a route Eleanor never would have found, so steep in places she thought the horses would stumble. But they made it to the valley floor without incident. Cedar Falls glowed in the distance. More lights than usual, lanterns in windows, torches in the streets. People were awake, watching. "They're looking for us," Mary whispered. "Let them look," Mercer said. "We're not going through town." He took them wide around the settlement, moving through farmland and forest. They approached Cedar Falls from the north side, where the Grand Hotel backed up against a small park. Mercer found them cover in a copse of trees maybe 200 yards from the hotel's rear entrance. "I'll go first," he said. "Scout the building. See where the guards are posted. You two wait here." "We should all," Eleanor started. "We should be smart. If I don't come back in 20 minutes, you ride for Helena and find a different judge." Mercer looked at her. "Promise me." Eleanor didn't want to promise, but she nodded. Mercer slipped into the darkness like smoke. Eleanor counted heartbeats, trying to calm her racing pulse. Beside her, Mary was praying silently, lips moving. 15 minutes passed. 18. Eleanor's hand went to her revolver. Then Mercer materialized out of the shadows like he'd never left. 2 guards at the back entrance, another 2 in the lobby. Judge Carson is in room 12, second floor. Window faces east. "How do you know that?" Mary asked. "I asked the kitchen boy, gave him $5 and told him his mother says hello." Mercer's mouth quirked. Kid's terrified of disappointing his ma. "Can we get to the room?" Eleanor asked. "I can get to the room. You 2 are staying here." "Not a chance." "Eleanor, we're partners, remember? You said it yourself. So we do this together or not at all?" Mercer looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's face must have convinced him. "Fine. But you follow my lead. Step where I step, stop when I stop. And if I say run, you run. No arguments." "No arguments," Eleanor agreed. They moved toward the hotel. The 2 guards at the back entrance were smoking, talking quietly, distracted. Mercer led Eleanor and Mary around the side of the building to where a trellis climbed the wall. Roses grew on it, thick enough to provide cover. "Can you climb that?" Mercer asked Eleanor. She looked up at the trellis. It was maybe 15 feet to the second-floor window. The wood looked old but sturdy. "Yes." "Then go. I'll be right behind you." Eleanor started climbing. The trellis creaked under her weight, but held. She could hear Mary climbing below her, breathing hard. Eleanor's hands were sweating, her shoulders burned, but she kept moving. She reached the second floor. The window was slightly open. Hotel rooms were always stuffy this time of year. Eleanor eased it wider, praying it wouldn't squeak. It didn't. She climbed through into a dark hallway. Mercer came through behind her, then helped Mary. They stood in the shadows, listening. Voices drifted up from the lobby. Footsteps on the stairs, someone going down, not up. A door opened somewhere, closed again. Room 12 was at the end of the hall. Light showed under the door. Someone was awake. Eleanor knocked. Soft but clear. "Who is it?" A man's voice, older, gravelly. "Eleanor Vale. I need to speak with you, Judge Carson. It's urgent." "I don't take visitors after dark, miss." "It's about Harold Whitmore, and murder, and corruption in your territory." Eleanor's voice was steady. "I have evidence, physical evidence, but if I don't get it to you tonight, I'll be dead by morning." Silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened. Judge Carson was maybe 60, gray beard, wire-rimmed spectacles, wearing a nightshirt and looking annoyed. But his eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're the bride from the auction," he said. "The one Mercer supposedly kidnapped." "I wasn't kidnapped. I was rescued." Eleanor held up the portfolio. "And I can prove everything, but you need to listen. Now, please." Carson studied her face, then Mercer's, then Mary's. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him. "Come in," he said. "Quickly." They filed into the room. Carson locked the door behind them, then gestured to the table. "Show me what you have." Eleanor spread the documents out. Her father's notes, the bank clerk's letters, ledgers showing fraudulent loans, death certificates for people who'd died suspiciously, property transfers that all benefited Whitmore. Carson read in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hard. If even half of this is true." "It's all true," Eleanor said. "My father spent 3 years documenting it. Harold Whitmore is a murderer and a thief. He killed my father because of what he knew, and he's been terrorizing this territory for a decade. These allegations require—" Gunfire erupted outside. Everyone froze. The shots were close. Right outside the hotel, maybe in the street. Mercer moved to the window, looked out. Whitmore's men, at least a dozen. They're surrounding the building. "How did they know?" Mary whispered. "Doesn't matter." Carson was already moving, gathering the documents into the portfolio. "Is there another way out of this building?" "Kitchen exit," Mercer said. "But they'll have it covered by now." More gunfire, closer this time. Someone screamed.
the sound of breaking glass from downstairs.
"They're coming in," Mercer said. His voice was calm, flat, the voice of a man who'd accepted that violence was inevitable. "Eleanor, take the judge and Mary. Get to the roof if you can. I'll hold them off." "No," Eleanor said. "This isn't negotiable." "You're right. It's not." Eleanor pulled her revolver. "We fight together or we die together. Those are the only options." Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Someone pounding on doors, shouting. They were searching rooms. Carson looked between them. "I can deputize you. Right now. Make this legal." "Will that stop them from killing us?" Eleanor asked. "No. But it means if you survive, you won't hang for defending yourselves." "Good enough." Eleanor looked at Mercer. "How do we do this?" Mercer was already moving furniture, creating cover. "Barricade the door. When they try to force it, we fire through the wood. Aim low, harder for them to return fire from the hallway." They worked fast. Dresser against the door, bed frame tipped on its side. Carson helped despite his age, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been in tight spots before. The pounding reached their door. "Open up! Federal warrant!" "Show me the warrant," Carson shouted back. "Judge Carson?" The voice outside went uncertain. "Yes, and I'm deputizing the people in this room. Anyone forces this door is committing assault on a federal officer. Back down, now." Silence. Then, "We've got orders from Mr. Whitmore, sas." "I don't care about Whitmore's orders. I'm a federal judge, and I'm telling you to stand down." More silence. Eleanor could hear hushed voices conferring, then footsteps retreating. "They're getting instructions," Mercer said. "Won't last long." He was right. 2 minutes later, the door shuddered from a massive impact. Someone had brought a ram or a piece of furniture to batter it down. Another impact. Wood splintered around the lock. Mercer raised his rifle. "Get ready!" The door crashed open. The barricade held but shifted. An arm came through the gap, holding a pistol. Mercer shot it. The gun clattered to the floor and the arm disappeared, its owner screaming. More gunfire from the hallway. Bullets punched through the door, through the walls. Eleanor dropped low and returned fire, aiming at where she guessed bodies would be. Someone fell in the hallway. She heard him hit the floor. The barricade shifted again. They were pushing through despite the gunfire, desperate or stupid or both. Eleanor's revolver clicked empty. She fumbled for the spare cylinder Mercer had made her carry, hands shaking but still moving. Reload, aim, fire. A man burst through the barricade. Mercer shot him in the chest. He went down, but another came right behind him, then another. The room filled with smoke and noise and terror. Eleanor couldn't tell who was shooting what. She just aimed at anyone who wasn't Mercer or Mary or Carson and pulled the trigger. Then silence. Sudden and absolute. Eleanor's ears rang. She blinked smoke out of her eyes. 3 bodies lay in the doorway. The hallway beyond was empty. "Reload," Mercer said. His voice was hoarse. Blood ran down his left arm from a wound Eleanor hadn't seen him take. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine. Reload." Eleanor reloaded with shaking hands. Beside her, Mary was ghost white but still standing, still holding her pistol. "They'll be back," Carson said. He'd picked up one of the dropped pistols, held it with familiar competence. "Bigger force next time. We can't hold this room." "Roof," Mercer said. "Only way." They abandoned the barricade and ran for the hallway. Bodies everywhere. Whitmore's men, hotel guests caught in crossfire. The building was chaos. People screaming, smoke filling the corridors. They found the roof access through a service stairwell. The night air hit Eleanor like cold water, shocking and clear after the smoke-choked hotel. "Now what?" Mary asked. "Now we make noise," Carson said. He fired 3 shots into the air, then 3 more. "That's a federal distress signal. If there's anyone in this town who's still loyal to actual law—" "There isn't," Mercer said flatly. "Whitmore owns everyone." "Not everyone," Carson fired again. "I've got U.S. Marshals quartered outside town. Didn't trust local accommodations. They'll hear this." More shots from below. Whitmore's men were coming up the stairs. "How long?" Eleanor asked. 20 minutes if they ride hard, 10 if they were already on their way. Mercer barricaded the roof access door. "It wouldn't hold long. We might not have 10 minutes. Then we make our own time." Eleanor moved to the roof edge. Below, she could see the street. Torches. Armed men. And in the middle of them all, Harold Whitmore, directing his forces like a general at war. She raised her revolver and fired. Missed. But the shot made Whitmore look up, made him see her standing there. "You want me so bad?" Eleanor shouted down. "Come get me yourself. Stop sending your men to die for your pride." Whitmore's face twisted with rage. He said something to the men around him, pointed up at the roof. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Mercer asked. "Buying time. Making him angry. Angry men make mistakes." The roof access door shuddered from impact. They were coming. Eleanor kept shouting, kept firing down into the street, not trying to hit anyone, just keeping Whitmore's attention focused up instead of on organizing his forces. The door burst open. Mercer fired. Someone screamed. The door slammed shut again. "How long has it been?" Mary asked. 5 minutes, Carson said. "Maybe 6. The door opened again. This time 3 men came through at once, firing as they came. Mercer took one down. Eleanor shot another. The third got behind cover and returned fire, forcing them back from the roof edge. More men were coming. Eleanor could hear them on the stairs. Too many. They were going to be overwhelmed. Then she heard it. Distant but getting closer. Hoofbeats. Lot of them. "That's cavalry pace," Carson said. "My marshals." Whitmore heard it too. Eleanor saw him looking toward the sound, saw uncertainty cross his face for the first time. The marshals hit Cedar Falls like thunder. Eleanor couldn't see much from the roof, but she heard shouting, heard Whitmore's men being ordered to stand down, heard resistance, and then gunfire. The pressure on the roof access eased. Whitmore's men were retreating, regrouping. "Stay down," Mercer said. "Let the marshals handle it." They waited. The gunfire below intensified, then gradually faded. Voices calling for surrender, the sound of men being arrested. Finally, footsteps on the stairs. Different this time. Measured. Official. "Judge Carson?" A new voice. "U.S. Marshal Davis, are you secure?" "We're secure," Carson called back. "3 deputies with me. Stand down." The door opened carefully. 3 marshals entered, guns drawn but not aimed. They wore federal badges and looked capable. "Judge, we got word about the distress shots. What's the situation?" "Attempted murder of a federal judge," Carson said calmly. "And I've got evidence of a criminal conspiracy that's going to shake this whole territory. Get Harold Whitmore in custody. Now." By dawn, it was over. They'd moved to the courthouse, the only building in town that felt secure enough. Whitmore sat in chains, his expensive suit torn and dirty, blood from a split lip staining his collar. His men were locked up. The marshals had taken control of the town. Eleanor sat in the witness chair, exhausted beyond measure, and told her story. All of it. The auction, her father's death, the evidence, the chase, the fire, the siege. Carson listened. So did the marshals. So did the crowd that had gathered. Townspeople who'd been too scared to speak before, but were finding courage now that Whitmore was in chains. When Eleanor finished, Carson asked, "And you'll testify to all of this in federal court?" "Yes." "Miss Hutchins?" Mary nodded. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Mercer?" Mercer looked at Carson. "I'll testify. But I've got a murder warrant out of this territory, 7 years old. For defending your family from men who were burning your home," Carson said. He'd read all the evidence during the night. "I'll have that warrant vacated. You're not a criminal, Mr. Mercer. You're a victim." Something broke in Mercer's expression. 7 years of running, of hiding, of believing he was a wanted man, gone in a single sentence. Carson turned to Whitmore. "Harold Whitmore, you're hereby charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, bribery of public officials, and about 15 other crimes I'll enumerate later. You'll be tried in federal court, and based on the evidence I've seen, you're going to hang." Whitmore didn't speak. Just sat there in his chains, empire collapsed around him, watching Eleanor with eyes that promised murder. "Get him out of my sight," Carson said. The marshals hauled Whitmore away. The crowd erupted in noise, some cheering, some crying, some just standing in shock that the man who'd controlled them for so long was finally brought down. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. Mercer was there immediately, arm around her waist, holding her up. "It's over," he said quietly. "Not yet. Trial still." "It's over," he repeated. The hard part's done. The rest is just paperwork. Eleanor wanted to believe that, but she'd learned these past months that nothing was ever really over until you buried it deep and moved on. Still, for now, for this moment, they'd won. The trial lasted 3 weeks, though it felt like 3 years. Eleanor testified for 2 full days, standing in front of a federal court packed with people who'd traveled from across the territory to watch Harold Whitmore's empire burn. Some came for justice. Some came for spectacle. Most came because they needed to see with their own eyes that a man like Whitmore could actually fall. The prosecution presented her father's documents piece by piece, building a case so overwhelming that even Whitmore's expensive lawyers from Denver couldn't dismantle it. 53 families destroyed, 12 deaths, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen through fraud and manipulation. And Eleanor was there for all of it, watching Whitmore's face as witness after witness took the stand. People who'd been too terrified to speak before found their voices now. A widow whose husband had died in a mining collapse testified that Whitmore's men had weakened the support beams the night before. A rancher showed documents proving Whitmore had diverted water illegally. Even Whitmore's own bank clerk, Thomas Morrison's replacement, broke down and confessed to forging loan papers under threat of losing his job. Mercer sat in the gallery every day, silent support that Eleanor drew strength from. Mary was there too, having testified about the bride auction and Whitmore's attempt to buy Eleanor like property. Judge Carson presided with an iron hand, allowing no delays, no theatrics from the defense. On the 18th day, the jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Guilty, on all counts. The courtroom erupted, people cheering, crying, embracing strangers. Eleanor just sat there, feeling hollowed out and strangely empty. She'd wanted this, fought for it, nearly died for it. But watching Whitmore's face as the verdict was read, seeing the disbelief, the rage, the final understanding that his money and influence meant nothing here, she felt no triumph, just exhaustion. "You all right?" Mercer asked quietly. He'd made his way through the crowd to her side. "I don't know what I am." "That's fair." He took her hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." They walked through Cedar Falls in the late afternoon sun. The town looked different now, cleaner somehow, like Whitmore's removal had lifted a shadow Eleanor hadn't fully noticed until it was gone. People nodded to them on the street. Some thanked Eleanor directly. An old woman grabbed her hand and wept, saying her husband had died in one of Whitmore's schemes and she'd never thought she'd see justice. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry for your loss" seemed inadequate. "You're welcome" seemed wrong. She just squeezed the woman's hand and hoped that was enough. They found Mary at the hotel, not the Grand, which was still being repaired from the siege, but a smaller establishment that had given Mary a job as a housekeeper. She was sweeping the front steps when they arrived, and the transformation in her was remarkable. The terrified 16-year-old from the auction had become someone harder, more focused. Still young, but aged in the way frontier life aged people. "It's done then," Mary said, setting the broom aside. "It's done," Eleanor confirmed. "When's the hanging?" "Judge Carson set it for 2 weeks from today, public execution in the town square." Eleanor felt sick saying it. She'd wanted Whitmore punished, wanted justice, but the thought of watching him die turned her stomach. Mary had no such reservations. "Good, I'll be there." They talked for a while about what came next. Mary had decided to stay in Cedar Falls, at least for now. The hotel owner was teaching her bookkeeping, and she'd discovered she had a head for numbers. Eventually, she might move to a bigger city, but for now this felt like enough. "What about you?" Mary asked Eleanor. "Back to the mountain?" Eleanor looked at Mercer. They hadn't talked about it explicitly, but she felt the pull of that cabin, that wilderness, that life they'd started building together. "Yeah," she said, "back to the mountain." "You gonna be all right up there? Just the two of you?" Eleanor thought about that. 3 months ago, the isolation would have terrified her. Now it sounded like peace. "I think we'll manage." Mary hugged her then, fierce embrace that spoke of shared trauma and survival. "Thank you for everything, for showing me it was possible to fight back." "You fought back on your own," Eleanor said. "I just gave you an excuse." After Mary went back to work, Eleanor and Mercer walked to the cemetery on the edge of town. Her father's grave was simple, just a wooden marker with his name and dates. The town had buried him in a pauper's plot since Eleanor had been unable to pay for anything better. She knelt beside the grave and placed her hand on the earth. "We got him, Papa. Whitmore's going to hang. Everyone knows what he did, and your evidence, all those years of work, it mattered. It saved people." Mercer stood a respectful distance away, giving her space. Eleanor was grateful for that. Some grief needed privacy. "I miss you," she said quietly. "I wish you could have met Colt properly. Not just that one time in the library. I think you would have liked him. He's good, in ways that matter." She wiped her eyes. "I'm going to be all right. I wanted you to know that. I'm stronger now. You'd be proud." The wind moved through the pine trees surrounding the cemetery, sounding almost like whispered words. Eleanor chose to believe her father heard her somehow. It made the leaving easier. They stayed in Cedar Falls for 2 more weeks, partly to see the sentence carried out, partly because Eleanor needed time to settle her father's affairs. The house where she'd grown up had been seized by the bank, Whitmore's bank, but Judge Carson had ordered it returned to her along with monetary compensation for the fraudulent debt. Eleanor walked through the empty rooms one last time, seeing ghosts everywhere. Her father at his desk, reading by lamplight. Her mother, dead these 10 years, cooking at the stove. Her own younger self, believing the world was fundamentally good and just. She wasn't that girl anymore. Wasn't sure she wanted to be. "You keeping it?" Mercer asked. He'd come with her but stayed near the door, letting her process. "No. Going to sell it. Give the money to the families Whitmore destroyed. There are widows with children who need it more than I do. That's generous. It's practical. I don't need this house. I've got a home." The morning of the execution, Eleanor woke before dawn with a knot in her stomach. Mercer was already up, making coffee in the hotel room they'd been sharing. They'd fallen into a routine these past weeks, sleeping in the same space but maintaining careful distance. Separate beds. Respectable boundaries. Like they were still strangers instead of people who'd nearly died together multiple times. "You don't have to go," Mercer said, handing her coffee. "Nobody would blame you for sitting this one out." "I know, but I need to see it through." Eleanor sipped the bitter brew. "My father deserves a witness." The town square was packed by the time the execution started. Eleanor and Mercer stood near the back, not wanting to be part of the spectacle. Judge Carson read the sentence in a clear, carrying voice. Whitmore stood on the gallows, hands bound, looking smaller than Eleanor remembered. Without his expensive suits and confident swagger, he was just a middle-aged man facing death. He scanned the crowd and his eyes found Eleanor's. For a moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, but maybe understanding. They'd both been shaped by this frontier, by the brutality and opportunity it offered. Whitmore had chosen to take and destroy. Eleanor had chosen to fight back, and now one of them would die while the other lived. The trapdoor opened. Whitmore dropped. His neck broke clean, quick death, more mercy than he'd given his victims. Eleanor turned away before they cut him down. She'd seen enough death for one lifetime. "It's over now," Mercer said quietly. "Really over." "Yeah," Eleanor said. "Let's go home." They left Cedar Falls the next morning with 2 horses, supplies for a month, and a sense of finality that felt almost like relief. The mountain trail was familiar now, each turn and landmark holding memories of Eleanor's transformation from frightened bride to someone capable of survival. The cabin appeared through the trees like a promise kept. It looked exactly as they'd left it, sturdy, weathered, real. Eleanor had been gone less than 3 months total, but it felt like years. Inside, everything was covered in dust. They spent the afternoon cleaning, restoring order, making the space livable again. It felt good to work with her hands, to focus on simple tasks instead of testimony and violence and justice. That night they sat on the porch as the sun set behind the western peaks. The sky went through its evening transformation, blue to gold to pink to purple, and Eleanor felt something inside her finally settle. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "That first day, in the church, when you kissed me." She looked at him. Was it really just about making a statement to Whitmore, or was there more to it? Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Honestly, I don't know. In the moment, yeah, it was about claiming you publicly, so he couldn't, but..." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" "But I'd seen you around town before. Few times over the years when I came down for supplies. You were always reading on your father's porch or walking to the library with a stack of books. And I remember thinking you looked like someone who still believed the world could be good, despite living in a place like Cedar Falls. He met her eyes. I wanted to protect that, even before I knew Whitmore was after you. Eleanor's chest tightened. I'm not that person anymore. No, you're someone better. Someone who knows the world can be cruel but chooses to fight anyway. Is that better? I think so. Innocence is easy. Courage after you've seen the worst, that's harder. They sat in silence for a while. Then Eleanor said, I'm not going anywhere. Just so you know, this cabin, this life, I'm staying. I was hoping you'd say that. But we need to talk about the sleeping arrangements. We're married, have been for months. And I'm tired of pretending there's still this huge distance between us when there isn't. Mercer's eyebrows rose. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop acting like strangers. We've been through too much for that. Eleanor stood up, held out her hand. Come to bed, the real bed, with me. Eleanor, do you want to? That's not the question. Actually, it's the only question that matters. She kept her hand extended. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm just asking if you want to stop pretending we're not whatever we are. Mercer looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it and stood. I want to. Have wanted to for a while. Just didn't think you. Eleanor kissed him. Not the quick statement from the church, but a real kiss. Slow and certain. His arms came around her and she fit against him like she'd been designed for this exact space. When they finally broke apart, Mercer was smiling, rare expression that made him look years younger. Okay then, Eleanor echoed. They went inside together, and for the first time since the wedding, the cabin felt complete. The months that followed were the happiest Eleanor had ever known. Not easy, mountain life was never easy, but filled with the kind of quiet contentment she'd never imagined possible. She and Mercer fell into partnership that deepened into something more. He taught her to hunt elk, to track mountain lions, to read weather patterns in the clouds. She taught him to cook beyond basic survival food, to appreciate poetry again, to laugh at stupid things. They built a second room onto the cabin for storage, expanded the garden, brought in chickens that provided eggs and entertainment in equal measure, started talking about maybe getting a milk cow next spring. And slowly, carefully, they built a life that belonged to them alone. But Eleanor couldn't quite let go of what had happened in Cedar Falls. The trial had exposed Whitmore's crimes, but it had also revealed something larger, a system that allowed men like him to thrive. Women sold at auctions, families destroyed by fraudulent debts, people too afraid or powerless to fight back. One afternoon, 6 months after the trial, a young woman appeared at the cabin. She was maybe 20, face bruised, wearing a wedding ring she kept twisting nervously. Are you Eleanor Mercer? The woman asked. I am. I heard. People said you help women in trouble. Eleanor invited her inside. The story came out haltingly. Forced marriage to pay her brother's gambling debts, husband who beat her when he drank, nowhere to run because the whole town was in on the arrangement. I don't know what I can do, Eleanor said honestly. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have much money. But you fought back against Harold Whitmore. Everyone knows that story. The woman's eyes were desperate. I just need to know it's possible, that someone like me can get away. Eleanor looked at Mercer. He nodded slightly. You can stay here, Eleanor said. Tonight, at least. Tomorrow we'll figure out where you can go, somewhere safe, and we'll give you money to start over. I can't take your money. You can, and you will, because someone helped me when I needed it. Eleanor took the woman's hands. You're not trapped. Remember that. You're never as trapped as they want you to believe. The woman stayed 3 days. Eleanor taught her to shoot, gave her a revolver and ammunition, helped her plan a route east to a cousin in Wyoming who might take her in. When she left, she hugged Eleanor so hard it hurt. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me I could. After she was gone, Eleanor sat on the porch and stared at the mountains. We're going to get more of them, women running from bad situations. Word's going to spread that there's a place in the mountains where someone will help. Probably, Mercer agreed. That all right with you? It's your cabin too, your life, your choice. He paused. But, yeah, it's all right with me. Over the next 2 years, 17 more women found their way to the cabin. Some stayed a night, some stayed weeks. Eleanor and Mercer helped all of them, with money, with shelter, with basic survival skills, with connections to people in other towns who could offer work or protection. Not all of them made it. 3 went back to their old situations, unable to imagine a different life. 1 died from injuries sustained before she reached them. But the others got out, started over, built new lives from the ashes of the old ones. And Eleanor discovered something she hadn't expected. Helping them helped her. Each woman who walked away stronger than she'd arrived felt like a small victory against the Harold Whitmores of the world. Mary visited once, 2 years after the trial. She'd saved enough money to buy a share in the hotel and was now part owner. She'd also met someone, a carpenter who was helping rebuild Cedar Falls into something better than it had been. "You look happy," Eleanor said, watching Mary help Mercer repair the chicken coop. "I am. Weird, right? After everything." Mary straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But I think maybe that's the point. We went through hell and came out the other side. Now we get to choose what comes next. And you chose Cedar Falls." "I chose not to run anymore. There's a difference." Mary looked at Eleanor. "What about you? You and Mercer ever think about moving down, getting involved in town politics? You'd be good at it." Eleanor thought about that. Once, she might have wanted it, the respectability, the influence, the chance to change systems from within. But that felt like someone else's dream now. "No," she said, "this is where I belong, up here, away from all that. Fighting from the margins instead of the center." "Something like that." Mary smiled. "Suits you better anyway. You were never made for playing politics." That night, after Mary had ridden back down to town, Eleanor and Mercer sat on their porch and watched the stars emerge. The sky up here was still impossibly vast, still filled with more light than Eleanor had ever imagined. "Do you regret it?" Mercer asked. "Staying up here instead of going back to civilization?" Eleanor thought about the question, about the life she might have had, remarried to some respectable man, living in a proper house with servants and social obligations. Safe, comfortable, ordinary. "No," she said. "I don't regret any of it. Not even the parts where we almost died, especially not those parts. They taught me I could survive anything." She leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, civilization is overrated. Up here I get to wake up to mountains instead of gossip, shoot elk instead of attending tea parties, live on my own terms instead of someone else's expectations." "You romanticizing frontier life now?" "No. I know it's hard. I know winters are brutal, and we're always one bad season away from disaster. I know we're isolated and vulnerable and probably half crazy from spending so much time alone." She turned to look at him. "But I also know I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else with anyone else. So no, I don't regret it." Mercer kissed her forehead. "Good, because I was going to feel pretty stupid if you did." 3 years after the trial, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly: missed monthly bleeding, exhaustion that sleep didn't cure, food that suddenly tasted wrong. She'd been so focused on survival that the possibility of new life hadn't occurred to her. Mercer's reaction was complicated. Joy mixed with terror in equal measure. His first daughter had died at 4 years old. The thought of trying again, of risking that kind of loss. "We don't have to," Eleanor said, watching his face. "If it's too much—" "No, I want this. Want you. Want—" He put his hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm just scared." "Me too, but we'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else." They spent the pregnancy preparing. Mercer built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it so smooth there wasn't a single rough edge. Eleanor sewed baby clothes from fabric she'd saved, trying to remember what her mother had taught her about tiny seams and delicate stitching. They argued about names. Mercer wanted to honor his first daughter, Emma, but Eleanor worried that would make it harder for him to see this child as her own person. They compromised on Emma as a middle name if it was a girl, and started considering other options for first names. The baby came in early spring, during a storm that made Eleanor glad they'd prepared for isolation. No doctor, no midwife, just Mercer, who'd helped deliver foals and calves, but never a human child, doing his best with shaking hands and whispered prayers to no one in particular. It was 14 hours of pain that made getting shot seem pleasant by comparison. Eleanor screamed things she didn't mean and probably broke Mercer's hand with her grip. But when it was finally over and their daughter was crying loud enough to shake the roof beams, Eleanor understood why people called it a miracle. "She's perfect," Mercer said, voice breaking. He was holding the baby like she might shatter. "Look at her. She's perfect." The baby wasn't perfect. She was wrinkled and red and covered in vernix and screaming her head off. But she was theirs, and she was alive, and that was enough. They named her Sarah Catherine Mercer. Sarah for Mercer's first wife. Catherine for Catherine Chen, the woman from the auction who'd burned down a mine office rather than accept being owned. Sarah grew fast, filling the cabin with noise and chaos, and a kind of joy Eleanor hadn't known was possible. She had Mercer's dark eyes and Eleanor's stubborn jaw and a personality that suggested she'd be hell on wheels once she learned to walk. "She's going to be trouble," Mercer said one evening, watching Sarah attempt to eat her own foot. "Good," Eleanor said. "Trouble means she won't let anyone push her around." The years passed. Sarah learned to walk, then run, then climb things she had no business climbing. More children followed. A son they named Daniel after Eleanor's father, then another daughter, then twin boys who nearly killed Eleanor during delivery but emerged healthy and screaming. The cabin expanded with the family. More rooms, more beds, more noise and laughter, and the particular chaos that came with raising children in the wilderness. But through it all, Eleanor and Mercer maintained the core of what they'd built together: partnership, respect, the understanding that they'd both survived hell and chosen each other anyway. Women still came to the cabin occasionally, looking for help. Eleanor helped when she could, though it was harder now with children underfoot. But she taught her daughters the same skills Mercer had taught her: shooting, tracking, survival. Taught them that strength came in many forms and that being scared didn't mean being helpless. She taught her sons too, made sure they understood that protecting women didn't mean owning them, that real men didn't need to control others to feel powerful, that courage meant standing up to systems that were wrong even when it cost you everything. One afternoon when Sarah was 12 and asking uncomfortable questions about where babies came from, Eleanor told her an edited version of how she and Mercer had met: the auction, the rescue, the ride into the mountains. "So Daddy bought you?" Sarah asked, looking horrified. "He bought my debt, which isn't the same thing but also isn't great," Eleanor admitted. "It was a complicated situation. But you chose to stay with him." "Eventually, after I learned who he really was." Eleanor looked at her daughter. "The point isn't that someone rescued me. The point is that I learned to rescue myself. Your father gave me tools and space and time, but I did the work. So if someone tries to auction me off, you shoot them and burn their house down in that order." Sarah grinned. "Got it." On their 15th wedding anniversary, Mercer took Eleanor back to the clearing where he'd first taught her to shoot. The tin cans were long gone, rusted away or buried by time, but the fallen log was still there, and the memories were sharp as yesterday. "Think you can still hit anything?" Mercer asked, handing her a revolver. Eleanor took it, felt the familiar weight. "Probably, though these days I'm more likely to use it on children who won't go to bed than on actual threats." Terrifying either way. She fired 6 times, hitting 5 invisible targets. Mercer applauded. "Not bad for an old married woman," he said. "Old? I'm 38. Ancient, practically decrepit." Eleanor punched his arm. "You're 45. That makes you prehistoric." "Fair point." He pulled her close, and even after 15 years, the fit was still perfect. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for building this life with me, for being stronger than you thought you could be." He kissed her forehead. "For saying yes in that church, even though you had no reason to trust me." Eleanor thought about that day, about standing in that cream-colored dress, watching Mary get dragged away, feeling Whitmore's eyes on her like ownership, about Mercer crashing through those doors like vengeance itself. "I didn't say yes because I trusted you," she admitted. "I said yes because I was desperate and you looked less terrible than the alternative." Romantic. "But I stayed because I learned to trust you, learned to love you, learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances." She looked up at him. "So thank you too, for being worth trusting." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand. Through the window, Eleanor could see their children, Sarah helping Daniel with reading, the twins wrestling on the floor, the youngest napping in her cradle. This was her life now. Noisy, chaotic, filled with diapers and dishes and the constant work of survival. Nothing like what she'd imagined standing in her father's library 15 years ago. But it was hers, built with her own hands and choices and courage, and that made it more valuable than any life someone else might have chosen for her. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the cabin was quiet, Eleanor stood on the porch and looked at the stars. Somewhere down in the valley, Cedar Falls was still there. Still growing, still changing, still full of people trying to survive the frontier's casual brutality. But up here in the mountains, Eleanor had found something those people were still searching for. Not safety. The wilderness was never safe. Not comfort. Frontier life was hard and would always be hard. She'd found freedom, real freedom, the kind that came from choosing your own path even when all the paths looked impossible. The kind that came from learning you were stronger than you'd ever imagined. The kind that came from building something real with someone who saw you as an equal instead of property. Mercer came out to join her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. "Think they'll remember us?" Eleanor asked. "The women we helped, years from now." "Some will, some won't. Does it matter?" "I guess not. We didn't do it for recognition. We did it because it was right, and because you couldn't stand the thought of anyone else going through what you went through." Mercer sipped his coffee. "That's legacy enough." Eleanor thought about all those women, the ones who'd made it and the ones who hadn't, the ones who'd built new lives and the ones who'd gone back to old ones, each of them a story, each of them a choice. "My father used to say that the world gets better one person at a time," she said quietly. "That you can't fix everything, but you can fix something, can help someone. And if enough people do that, eventually the world changes." "Your father was a wise man." "He was, and he died trying to prove it." Eleanor leaned against Mercer's shoulder. "But he was right. Look at Cedar Falls now. Whitmore's gone. The auction system is illegal. There's actual law. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. Because of you. Because of a lot of people. I was just the one angry enough to do something about it." They finished their coffee and went inside. The cabin was warm, filled with the soft breathing of sleeping children and the particular peace that came from exhaustion, honestly earned. Eleanor lay in bed beside her husband and thought about the girl she'd been 15 years ago. Terrified, powerless, standing on an auction block with no good choices left. That girl would barely recognize the woman Eleanor had become. Scarred, capable, mother and wife and survivor. Someone who'd faced the worst the frontier could offer and came through it not unbroken. There were cracks, there would always be cracks, but stronger for the breaking. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "Love you too," Mercer replied, half asleep already. Eleanor smiled and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be children to feed and chores to finish, and probably some new crisis to manage. There would be hard work and harder choices, and the constant negotiation between survival and something more. But tonight, she could rest. Tonight, she was safe, and loved, and free. And that was everything.